trying to spread financial literacy. So I'm on the board of directors for a nonprofit down here in North Carolina. Yeah, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, for those who were wondering. Called the Kaiser Foundation of North Carolina. We do financial literacy programs, put on poverty simulations. We're just out trying to help the community. So the Kaiser Foundation of North Carolina, and then the ABC Squared, where I'm just trying to help Main Street meet Wall Street. I want everyone to take a second and just everyone on here, ask yourself a question if you've ever seen Star Wars. We'll come back to that.
So both of you have mentioned different vocabulary that I think it's important to kind of explore a little bit more, because there might be individuals who are knowledgeable as those that are just, kind of starting in the space. DAOs. Tell us the difference between what a DAO is, what is maybe a traditional corporation, and how does that, does it have anything to do with tokens? Does it have anything to do with cryptocurrency? Because there's a lot of conversation about that.
Absolutely. So yeah, DAOs are a fascinating, growing niche into which people pour all kinds of weird and wonderful ideas. It's one of the things that makes it so fun. DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And what it really represents is an attempt to create a blockchain native organizational form with all of the flexibility and transparency and openness and trust, all these sort of very Web3 and blockchain focused values, enabling to have that, but also have people collaborate collectively. Now that's really exciting. And there's all kinds of very stimulating, very interesting projects that have been developed ever since the launch of blockchain. But it's been a bit of a problem, because how does, your cool, decentralized, autonomous organization where you're playing with your magic internet money and it's all equal and there's not a company, how does that actually translate to the real world? Because you may have your DAO, you may have your internet money, but at some point you're probably going to have to pay rent or a mortgage or for lunch, frankly. So one of the major problems, challenges, opportunities that the blockchain legal space has been dealing with over the last few years is how to take the DAO and how to translate it into the real world system. And so what we've seen is some really interesting attempts from various different jurisdictions to try and provide some shape to this. But it's conceptually quite interesting, right? Because a company law presumes that it's in a place, or at least it's registered in a place. You have a thing called a company that abides by a certain set of laws and is registered in a certain place and has a certain address, and also has humans who run it, the directors. But what does it mean if the company is on the internet, isn't in any one place, and is actually run by algorithms? So it's been a sort of very interesting, decade-long attempt now, possibly slightly longer, to try and merge those things together, and some solutions have developed. Yeah, it's interesting.
So I'm going to hop over to you in a second, Marcus, but going back over to the DAO side, one of the things that was fascinating to me is actually the platforms where you can actually create DAOs, and then how many DAOs actually exist around the world. And then the other challenge that, I was thinking is you have this collective group of individuals who are part of a DAO, and then they create a treasury, which have the tokens, and you don't always know who the individuals are that are managing this treasury, or what would happen if someone decides to take the treasury. There's, and that's one reason why I think that we're looking in the United States at the market structure bill and all these other regulations, is how do we kind of protect the consumer? Because we're all excited about getting involved with the tech. And I know, Marcus, we're going to talk, about your background and how you're helping your clients. But James, from that perspective, what have you seen the trends over the last few years, and where do you think that this type of consumer protection is heading?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. There's a lot to it. Been the development of the DAOs themselves. There's been the development of the DAO wrappers. There's also been a whole infrastructure of DAO tooling and DAO service provider entities. So companies like Aragon or various DAO launch pads that will just help you, actually set up and run your DAO. But that still leaves you with some very particular problems because, yes, for instance, Jackie, as you just mentioned, you could have this shared wallet. It could have 10 USDC in it, or it could have 100 million. How do you interact with the other people? So it all starts getting. One of the interesting things for DAOs is it's like this blank slate, but then people rapidly start recreating all the problems of the pre-existing organizational world, and they have to kind of figure it out from scratch sometimes. But this is actually one of the reasons why people have wanted to have wrappers in the first place, because it's to give protection. If you find that another person who has access to the treasury runs off with the money or does something very strange and illegal with the money, and you're also a signatory on that multi-sig, what then? So this is one of the reasons why people want to have the company wrappers, because it helps limit their liability. As for the consumer protection question, well, I think this it isn't just the DAO piece. It's more it's about consumer protection for tokens, because people launching DAO tokens and whatnot. And yeah, I mean it's a gigantic question. There's been a lot of changes for sure over the last few years. Different regulators trying to clamp down, make it harder. Sadly, we have to face facts. There have been various scams over the last while that have made regulators quite concerned. A lot of this has come back to securities law, which particularly in the US has been a sort of vexed and back and forth question with the sort of political changes in relation to the Securities Exchange Commission. So yeah, I'd say it's an ongoing story, and different jurisdictions have had different approaches.
I know. Marcus, what's your take because of the clients that you're supporting, and what kind of advice do you give them if they're asking you certain questions?
Hey, yeah. So just going off of just trying to break it down to a client as from crypto and blockchain to that perspective, James mentioned earlier, they were all corporations, right? So Bitcoin, I would say Bitcoin is kind of like an equity, right? As in Bitcoin, although it doesn't have profits or earnings per se that you can track Bitcoin by the technicals. You can track Bitcoin by the movement. So you don't have to look at the fundamentals and see where the earnings are, the profits are in there in the pure coin wise. The other tokens, and Ethereum, Solana, those are all technologies. Those are all companies. Or you can go look those up, and some of those are literally companies, right, where they have earnings and profits. So those are two different ways to look at it, just to start it. And then I asked you all earlier about Star Wars. So we can go down a story, and this story isn't necessarily my own story. And it doesn't always jive with Star Wars, but think back to all the people who have seen Star Wars, how they communicated, right? They communicate. They had the little phones, that was Star Trek 2, or they could do like that. They had holograms, they had all this technology, right? Which we're starting to see come along. They traveled the entire galaxy, the entire universe. Think about how they use their currency, credits and debits, credits and deductions. That's what the blockchain is, right? The blockchain tracks credits and debits in the mutable system, that if something does happen, there's a way that you can find out what happened, when it happened inside the blockchain. It may be hard to find, if you have a wallet or if you have a key that you get lost, but if you spend enough time, you can find it and you can see what happened. So that's kind of just a high level breakdown of how I would break down the blockchain versus Bitcoin and tokens. I would throw tokens. I don't mean throw. I would include tokens in there with Ethereum and everything else. And Bitcoin is just kind of something else off to itself.
So for both of you, if you were approached by a client or a consumer who's brand new to this area, what do you think that you would want to tell them as they're stepping into this space?
Well, my clients are typically people who are looking to set up a blockchain-related enterprise. So I suppose if they were coming in completely cold, there'd probably be a few broader questions about what really they're planning. I'd probably hook them up with various different consultants to help them think through their tokenomics, the general background of it. However, more broadly, which is I think what your question was really addressing, consumers. So I often have family and friends ask me about particular coins, particular ideas, and I just say, not too dissimilar to what Marcus was saying. I mean, some things are reasonably well established, like Bitcoin. Some projects are, they're a big layer 1 or layer 2. You can see they have a lot of activity in them, and then a lot, you just have to accept that it's highly speculative and should really be careful. So I always urge people to just, get involved, but you have to be prepared to lose most or all of it, particularly if it's anything outside of the top 10 tokens.
So Marcus, why don't you, add to that? And then I have a follow-up question for James.
Right. And just jumping in off of what James said. So if someone came into me, so here's the thing, like recently we've had the legislation that started to codify this stuff to where we can actually use crypto inside, and I can advise people inside of it as a fiduciary, right? Before, people were still having conversations. They were still asking me about Bitcoin. They were still asking me about crypto. So like I said, I'm using the analogy to them, explaining to them that Bitcoin is like an equity, Ethereum is like a corporation. So if they want to decide how much they should spend to start on it, obviously you should do your research. You should learn about these things before you spend money on it. But a general amount would be, I like to recommend a nice dinner for two. Maybe if you want to spend that to start buying a token, or if you're going to, the price of going to a professional sporting event for two, depending on where you are on the scale. Different things cost different amounts of money for people. I mean, if you're a multi-millionaire, then you might want to just go 1%. Maybe you want to go buy 1% or 0.25% of one of these tokens, because you wouldn't pay attention to the price of a professional sporting event unless you go sit in the box seats. Then maybe you would. So just in range with that, like don't jump all in at once, and study what you're getting before you start. And as James said earlier, I always tell them never put in more to start than you can plan to lose 100%.
So for both of you, James, I'm going to kind of start with you first, because you were talking about the fact that a lot of your clients are startups in the blockchain space, and they're looking at, different locations to create. How do you advise them, or maybe you don't, or how do you give them the guidance as to where to go from the security perspective? Because if they are creating a product or service using technology, and we all know that there's all different levels of developers, how are those companies thinking about making sure that that the product or service that they're providing will end up being secure, especially because of we talked a little bit about AI, and now there's a lot of other ways that things can get hacked and compromised. So do you have that type of conversation with your clients?
Well, I have lots of conversations on securities with clients, but as for security itself, not so much. Typically, the clients I speak to would often be, they're quite tech focused. Some of them are sort of TradFi executives coming in, but there'll be a very strong tech person there, and they're usually thinking about their security themselves. And yeah, it's a complicated and crazy world out there. You have to be very careful about frauds and scams and hackers in this space. You go to the big crypto conferences, for instance, and there's always scammers floating around, hackers trying to get your details. It's bracing.
So for both of you, Marcus, I'll have you start off on this question. How do you speak with someone about protecting their identity in this space? In terms of a lot of times we don't realize what is visible on the blockchain, and and sometimes we're too open to kind of sharing what it is that we have access to. So what kind of guidance do both of you are you giving or sharing with either family, friends, or even clients?
Right. So I want to elaborate a little bit on what James was saying from the last point, where he was mentioning different ways when you were speaking of security. So like I mentioned earlier, there are now funds that you can actually buy that are Bitcoin. You'll pay a fee. So it's not like buying the token. So you're going to pay a cost for the security, but the security inside of that is USA regulated. It's been put through review by the SEC. Some of these are set up where they pay dividends. I'm not going to name any particular funds, but there's a big fund that has that's tied to Bitcoin. The biggest one has a fund that pays like a 10% dividend. It also has a fund that's tied to a bond, so it kind of smooths out the volatility. So there are just different ways you can invest, and obviously the big ones, from Grayscale and BlackRock, those type of funds. But as far as online security for using a big blockchain or any type of transaction like that, I mean, that is definitely something that you have to be well aware of. You have to know who you're working with and make sure that the systems they're using are secure. And then you just have to make sure that what you're using is secure. You have to work with reputable people. Like, I mean, Robinhood, that's a big one, but Robinhood's pretty secure if you want to go in there and use your type of, put your information into there. I speak on bigger firms and bigger type of things like that just for security reasons and just for the back. And like I said, when you go into those funds, they've already been reviewed, not necessarily approved by the SEC, but they've been reviewed. They report quarterly. You can see a little more transparency. So I don't even know if it answers your question.
That's fine. We're giving information out. James, you and me.
I'd like to riff off that because, I think your point about dealing with the institutions and like Robinhood, I think one of the most important, probably quite basic considerations from a security perspective for the average consumer user will just basically be whether or not they use, whether or not they engage in self-custody and whether or not they're using a centralized exchange or whatnot. This is a sort of fairly fundamental dividing line. A lot of people will use both for different components of what they're doing, but I'd suggest that for the average person coming in cold, probably having, using a centralized exchange or basically not doing self-custody where, if you get the keys, then it's just gone, everything's burned, lost forever, and that's where, it's quite a kind of interesting.
I don't know if we lost James or not. There's like this pausing. I know he'll come back to us.
No worries.
Yeah. So Marcus, when you're talking to your clients, are you talking to them about cold wallets? Are you talking to them about, how they custody? I know the challenge, even in suggesting cold wallets, some of the major cold wallets like Ledger recently had a hack at their payment processor level. So again, it's the idea that even sometimes things that where we think is safe, there are breakthroughs. So what kind of advice do you give to your clients? How do you recommend to them to do their research?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember like a year ago, right around the spring of this year, last year, that was a huge hack. And, a lot of Bitcoin was stolen, taken from a facility. So like James was actually mentioned, if you're just starting out, you probably don't want to self-custody. You don't want to hold your own wallet. You want to have some type of, if you're investing in one of those funds, like I mentioned, it's inside of an account that's FDIC insured or SPIC insured, and you do lose your funds, there's a way that you can get them back from the insurance that is offered. But in general, if you're just starting out with coins and tokens, it might be better to just pay the fee or find someone like James who can help you integrate it into your system than just going out and trying to do it yourself, DIY. Like you said, I know there are people who are just like one way or the other, where either I'm going to do it all myself, the purist, I guess is the word you would call them. And then there are the people who are just like, I'll pay somebody to do this. I don't mind paying a little bit of a fee to get, or even a lot of a fee to get some returns and know I have security and peace of mind. And like I said, sometimes insurance, the SPIC on the backside, the FDIC, depending on what type of account that you have it inside of.
So thank you, Marcus, for sharing that. James, I know that you kind of got frozen and then kicked out. So do you want to continue on with the conversation?
Oh, yes, no, I was just saying that this question of self-custody and the consumer, it sort of flags this really interesting policy question that's been emerging, and it kind of reaches back into, the earliest values of crypto, because, it started out in this quite sort of libertarian, cyberpunky way. of radical self-custody, decentralized trust, a kind of going against established finance. But part of the story that we've had in recent years is actually it being incorporated into traditional financial and regulatory patterns. And on one hand, some people would see that as a loss, but on the other hand, that's also kind of what's driving it forward and giving it the mass uptake. So it's a kind of an interesting contradiction there.
It's a very interesting contradiction. I know that I'm a little bit always conflicted when I'm seeing that the big banks and other entities are getting involved, because I remember when I first became a Bitcoin miner a number of years ago, I was volunteering at the Bitcoin conference. I think it was in Miami, and I was listening to all these major companies talking about how they were, getting all these machines and doing everything. And all I kept thinking about, what about me? I'm a little person here. I'm a Bitcoin miner. What's going to happen to us as individuals? And the idea that, the original concept with Bitcoin was to create that economic freedom and security. So if you wanted to not transact within the traditional banking system, well, now you are. And that's not a bad thing, but it's, it just creates a different mindset.
Yes, it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, the rise of stable coins definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in the UK, have you seen, now you talked about the fact that there's many different jurisdictions. So do you see everyone kind of operating the same, or do you, even though there's similar rules, or do you see that some jurisdictions are becoming more progressive? They're really looking to try to pull in the business, and so they're making this more open for developing these new types of innovative tech and companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say speaking very broad brushstrokes, you have, there's the approach being taken under MiCA. It's been coming into force for the last while. A bit slower moving, more focused on financial stability in Europe. More rules, although, actually some interesting gaps in it as well. You then have what the US has been doing, which, although, it's interesting because it feels so far that it's a little bit more vibes than actual, rules changes in some respects. So like the Clarity Act, it's very unclear as far as I'm aware thus far. I don't even know what's in it yet. And say Genius, it seems like a lot of the provisions haven't actually come out yet. So there's, the big flashy announcement, but then what's actually happening? And then you have small offshore jurisdictions really competing for the work. In particular, places like the BVI and the Cayman Islands have been very, very active. Dubai, obviously, for all its plethora of different sub-jurisdictions, you've been seeing a lot. It's varied, And I think also governments are kind of, on one hand, they want to attract the business, but they're looking to protect the consumer and also financial stability. In the UK, there's been various stablecoins proposals that came out recently, but one of them included, the idea that individual holdings could only be about, I think it was 10,000 sterling, which just isn't really,
That's not a lot.
It's not a lot for some use cases and people that just really isn't going to work at all. So it's kind of, what do you want? You say you want to be a center for digital asset industry, and then you have a rule like that. So, the right hand will be doing something and the left hand will be doing another, I think. And I don't think that's just a UK thing. I think that happens in a lot of places.
Yeah. Marcus, what's your take on this?
Yeah, James, good points. And over here in the US, it's like we had a election last year where we moved into an ultra conservative movement, but it's also a populist movement. So the people are really behind Bitcoin, or like the administration's behind Bitcoin, like you said, the Genius Act, whether you think it's a genius move or not, and just moves to codify and regulate crypto. You see banks adding to it. You see it increasing around the world. They're adding to their reserves. Here we take most of them from seized Bitcoin and crypto, but you can see it's going to continue to grow in the U.S. Just based on the investments from the people inside the administration, the investments from the people inside the administration's family, and just the populist movement. Like I said, there's a different type of economy now. There's a different type of investor now. As Jackie mentioned, there's a movement for the decentralized move of money where people don't exactly want to be tied to a dollar. So those people are getting, upset when they see this stuff move towards the stablecoin. Whereas like you mentioned, James, the purists who want to own their own wallets, own their own, they're not letting anyone help them with that. So, and then you have just this, with this explosion of just crypto and Bitcoin at the beginning of last year, it was crazy. Like just how high and the run that it was on. And it was on a crazy run until the end of the fourth quarter, the beginning of 25 until the end of the fourth quarter, mad run. But that was pushed below what people were expecting inside the world. Then you also have the dollar, which was falling and looking to be stabilized. So maybe some of that money that was shifting from the dollar was going overseas and into Bitcoin and back out of Bitcoin. So it's just a lot inside of it over here as well. I love that perspective from across the pond.
So the next question that I wanted to ask you guys, because this is something that's close to my heart. Do both of you have wills? Yeah. James, do you have a will? No. Okay. Well, this is something that I think is really important. And this is the question I have for anyone who's listening and also for everyone here is, how do we explain to our families what our digital assets are? So that way, if something happens to us, that doesn't just stay online and it doesn't benefit. I know that I've had conversations with, each of you in different times about the books that I've written. And, I have a daughter who I simply adore. And I wrote a book for us called The Essential Digital Asset Organizer for attorneys and their clients. So I could write down everything so that way she would know where everything was, from my Square account to whatever. So how are you guys either helping your families understand what you have access to and where, or your clients? Because I think this is an important conversation that we have kids, young teenagers who now have digital assets, and they're not thinking about the value of the assets, or probably telling their families. So what do you think we should do with this new financial literacy?
So yeah, I guess I should say, full disclosure, my will is written out. It is not notarized and put into the file paper. So I guess I don't want to say out here, but yeah, it's like, but in that whole thing, like you want to, with your partner, you want to have all that stuff written out. You want to know where everything's going. You want to know where everything is. I know we were speaking offline, Jackie, and I was talking about another podcaster that I know. He has a podcast, and he was talking about his. So we're not talking about tokens, but we're also talking about digital assets because they all can fit inside of his trust. He was setting up a trust, and he was like, "What if this podcast XYZ? I don't want it to go. I've said it before. I've said it many times. It's going to go to someone you don't want it to go to. It'll go to someone you want to go to, or it'll go to the state, and they'll decide who it wants to go to, which kind of ties back the state or government, which it kind of ties back to going to someone where you don't want to go to. So there are people who you see it way too often, unfortunately, not just with digital assets. When one spouse passes away, the other spouse has no idea how to do anything. I mean, they can't even pay the bills, and it's just sad. It's just true. These are things I see all the time. So when it comes to these digital assets and their digital tokens, you might have to explain it even more, just like what it is, or explain what you want them to do with this asset inside of there. Like it may go up, you may want them to say, you may say, all right, I have this inside the trust. As soon as I die or pass away, I want you to sell it because it's appreciated so much that the capital gains on it will be really small if you sell it at that step up basis inside this trust. But if they don't know that, they may just keep the asset, let it grow, or they may keep it until it goes to zero. So it can help with having instructions for the actual tokens that you have in there. And I'll let James elaborate into what ones he would probably put inside of this trust.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. There's been various new bits of case law that have come out, I think, about how digital assets should be treated in wills and trusts. And yeah, I think it's a live, ongoing question. I mean, to my mind, if you have it held, just in centralized exchanges or non-custodial wallets, then that presents a much less difficult problem, because you can say, well, actually, I'm the inheritor of, Joe Bloggs. Please give me Joe Bloggs as Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana and whatever else. But again, firstly, to make it quicker, like with any financial asset, your inheritors need to know that you have that thing somewhere, so they can at least know whom to ask. Otherwise, it's potentially a bit of a shit show. And the other situation is, we come back to the self-custody thing. How does that get managed? Because if you hand over from a purist perspective, if you hand over your password to someone else, then they could just take it. I think putting it in vaults, maybe leaving different parts of the password of different lawyers. It depends on how much you're trying to protect. I met one guy at a conference who buries his keys in big steel barrels in his garden. So, I guess if you let your family know where the barrel is, take it from there.
So I guess, James, your background is such. Would you ever consider being a fiduciary to holding, information like this on behalf of a client? Or what options do you think maybe that we should be thinking about creating to help people? Because now that more people own crypto or are digital assets or, anything, whether so many more things are going to be tokenized. How do we educate the financial planners, the attorneys, the accountants, and create the professionals that can actually support?
Well, I think it's a live, ongoing conversation. My understanding is, for instance, that STEP, the Society of Trusts and Estate Practitioners, that this has become an increasingly important part of their internal training over the last, few years, particularly because, for some clients, the sums are really quite significant. I think, there's a new wave of fiduciaries who will help provide this, various different forms of custody. There are different platforms which have different permissions on it. I think it's just all about making sure that you have a plan and conversations in place.
So when you are advising clients who were creating DAOs or any other, do you also talk to them about exit plans, or what happens when one of their officers or directors has a health challenge and then they're involved with, this type of tokenization type of a situation? How do you advise them?
Well, so far, we've mainly approached that from an operational perspective, who has control of what wallet. I think, speaking quite frankly, most of my clients are really 45 would be the uppermost age-wise, and often they're a lot younger than that. So it really hasn't been uppermost for them. These are younger entrepreneurs, but it is definitely a question that people will need to consider, and I know it's being considered as well.
Yeah, Marcus, what are your thoughts?
Gotcha. Yeah. So we're saying fiduciary for, let's just make sure that people understand, like, the thing with the fiduciary. Anyone can be anyone can be a fiduciary if you name someone like your trustee to your executor of your trustee, a sheriff if they're executing the auction. These are people who are fiduciary, so they're operating with a duty of care. They're basically putting your best interest first. And the thing that people always mention is the conflict of interest. One thing people have to realize is every business, there's always going to be some type of conflict of interest. You just need to make sure that they explain it to you, right? What the conflict of interest is. A good question to ask someone in this situation is, how do you get paid? How are you going to get paid from whatever we're doing in this situation? Like, where do you get paid? And it's not, I don't care how you get paid. I just need to know how you get paid. If that person can't explain to you how they get paid, they have a good understanding of what they're doing with you. Because some people will do things and they can't even explain it to you themselves. Can't explain the product. They can't explain what you're in, and then they can't explain how they get paid. Go ahead and tell those people you'll talk to them later. Go find James.
So I do want to make sure that everyone who's following along with this live stream knows how to reach you guys. So why don't you go ahead and share exactly, and all that information will be in the blog below. But I guess we'll start with James first, and then Marcus. How would someone be able to reach you for your, what you're doing?
Absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, you can reach us on daospv.com. So that's daospv.com. And yeah, if you want to set up a international corporate structure for your Web3 projects, please get in touch. You can also look us up on LinkedIn. So my name's James Kingston, as you can see there, and DAOSPV. Just type in LinkedIn, you'll find us there.
Marcus, how would they reach you?
So you can look at my firm's website. So it's just going to be, if you look after the word of up there, theabcsquared.com, that you can go there and find the link there. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm pretty active on there, Marcus Sturdivant Senior, the way you see my name on here. Actually have a YouTube channel that I'm growing. I have an interesting thing with the YouTube channel I'd like to share. So I did a live stream, but it was like a recorded stream, just like some of my content, just to put financial literacy out there, and record it, and it went live. So I looked at it, and it had like 20 comments this morning. I was like, what is this? So this is something people should look for. I look in the comments, and it's like people pushing some crypto all in my comments, 20 something comments, just buy this at the open, buy this, buy this, buy this. And I'm just like, I'm looking at it like, what in the world? Like, I could go in there and delete all the comments, but I just waited later until the day, and the comments went away. YouTube took the comments for themselves, I guess. The people were bots. So you have to look out for that type of stuff when you're investing in crypto as well. There are bots everywhere. So
there's definitely bots. And for those that don't know, there's layer 1 protocols, there's layer 2, there's there's market makers, there's companies that kind of create more movement. So there's just like, traditional finance, the markets that we're in are not always as pure as we think. So, again, you do have to be kind of careful as you're doing investments. I'm looking at, one of the newsletters that I have, and it's talking about the United Kingdom, and it's talking about the UK Financial Conduct Authority, and how it's creating, various rules dealing with money laundering, terrorist financing, and transfers of funds. What do you think people need to be aware of for that, James? Again, there's a lot going on within every community, but it looks like the UK is definitely issuing certain rules and regulations for companies to be aware of.
Yeah, I think, one should always be careful on these topics. A lot of it is just, making sure that you know who you're dealing with. That's doing a little bit of basic research goes a long way in terms of making sure that you don't get into trouble. And then, it's always worthwhile engaging in some, even if only very initial legal consultations, just to make sure you're not, there aren't in fact any gigantic potholes directly in front of you of what you plan to do. So yeah, I think just a little bit of research and a little bit of reflection beforehand is a good idea.
So we have just a few more minutes, and I'm going to throw 2 things out to both of you. Is there, as you have been navigating learning in this space, are there any books that you think that individuals should be reading, either for professional or just their own interest, so that way they can learn a little bit more about this space? And do you have any favorite books that you would recommend? I love reading, and I'm always reading books. I feel with blockchain related stuff, though, it's not a very book focused thing. I think I've only read, my house is full of books, but I think I've only actually ever read one blockchain focused book, which was by the Tapscots a few years ago, which I think would be very dated now, to be honest. So yeah, I tend to recommend people go on to stuff like Decrypt, DL Llama, just all these different outlets that there are, and then just get into Reddit and see all the different communities there, and go to events, to be honest. Yeah,
and newsletters. Yeah, it's not a very book-heavy space. I tend to find. Maybe you disagree. I mean, it depends. If you want like a nice fat book of blockchain securities law, that's one thing, and that's useful. But as a kind of like general primer, yeah. What book do you have there? I feel you're holding a book in your hand.
I am. I'm holding. I have like around 10 books that I'm in the process of reading, and the Bitcoin Standard is one of them. Again, there's we've talked about that. There's a variety of different protocols. There's Bitcoin. There's Ethereum, there's Cardano, there's Solana, there's a lot of different ones. And I like to really see what everyone's thoughts are on the various history, because again, the tech is changing fast, but the history always stays the same. So this actually, again, not that this is the only book to read, but I'm saying, I'm thinking, yes, we have a lot of newsletters, but sometimes picking up the books to see what people are you're right. It might not be current, but it's historic thoughts.
Yes.
Just like the Bitcoin white paper is historic thoughts that actually is pretty timeless. So, yeah. So it looks as if we have lost Marcus. And that happens with tech, just like we lost you, early on. Any last minute thoughts that you'd like to share? And then we're going to kind of end the evening, because I really appreciate you. It's almost 1:00 your time.
No, I mean, it's been a pleasure to participate. I think, one of the interesting things about the blockchain space and why I enjoy it so much is it calls up so many interesting and stimulating questions of policy, of law, of business models, often all actually rolled into the same point. So yeah, I think it's exciting. There's a lot going on. There's a lot more to it, and a lot more kind of pro-social things than just the latest semi-scammy meme coin. So yeah, I think if you're curious about it, there's a lot of opportunity to rethink institutions and make a bit of money and have fun. So yeah, come join.
So I really appreciate your sharing that. A few things for people to kind of take note. If you happen to be in London the first week of February, I will be there. I'll be moderating a panel for the Digital Asset Forum, and we're going to have a networking event. So James, hopefully I'll be seeing you in person. And then right after that, the Blockchain Legal Institute is actually heading to Denver. And so we're going to be networking there, and there's a hackathon going on there. And then the Blockchain Legal Institute actually is going to be hosting 2 hackathons this year. We just finished our first one in 25. We're going to be doing a Maryland Blockchain Association Youth Hackathon. And right now it looks like ICP is going to be one of the bounty sponsors with Caffeine AI. And then we're going to be doing a year 2 of the Blockchain Legal Institute Legal Tech Hackathon. And that will all be on DoraHack. So, for those that are following us, you'll be able to hop into various, websites and follow and learn more about what we're doing. So, James, thank you so much. I know that I definitely am glad that you hopped on, because for those that are interested, even though I'm a partner at Cogent Law, if you're interested in, incorporating or doing something overseas, James is definitely the person to go to. He has a lot of background knowledge, and I know I use him, in many different ways. So everyone who's hopping on tonight, definitely thank you. And ask your questions. I will shoot them over to Marcus as well as to James, and we'll get back to you. Anyway, thank you so much, James. Have a great night.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.